just like take everybody's money and everyone gets the same amount. So it's like finding this balance, and what we find across history is different societies come up with different answers to this question. And how you should answer this question and what's fair and what is best for society is what we're going to talk about. Because now with this income inequality stuff, it feeds right into over there. Income inequality and tech feed in both directions. In terms of the more money you have, the more access to tech you have, and then the more access to tech you have, the more money you can get. And so it's this very complicated sort of relationship. But also on the other hand, there's this other question of, as tech has increased, there's this question of, has tech made things, given more equality in terms of opportunity? Because the fact is that people can now access information and talk to each other in ways they never could before. But on the other hand, there's also this question of, is it making it less equal? Because we now have companies who, like the big tech companies, have more power than nations do. And so that's really what I want to talk about now. So basically, this was all a long-winded way of saying, like, this is the inequality issue in a nutshell in terms of money, is we don't want complete income equality, but we also do want equality of opportunity, and it's hard to make those two things go hand in hand. So now, everyone on board with the little capitalist, communist spiel? So a pure communist society is one in which you just say, like, everyone's the exact same, and no nation in history has ever been like a pure. Pardon?
Do it for the people.
But like no, I'm not sure if any nation has ever reached the level of like the pure theoretical Marxian communism.
I wanted to comment on that. Actually, during the rule of General Secretary Khrushchev in USSR, there was a program that actually equalized everyone's pay, practically diminished everyone's drive to become better. Just destroy people's morale. They thought, why am I doing this? Why am I producing more than the norm prescribed me? I will get equal pay regardless. So why do I even try?
Yeah. So this is exactly. So the USSR under Khrushchev, that was like one of the closest any human society has ever come to being a pure communist system. And I say it's not a fully pure communist system because you still had, like, Khrushchev, who wasn't getting paid the same as everybody else necessarily. But like generally, and what you saw was literally a society in which people were just like, why the hell am I even doing this? Like, I'm not getting anything out of working hard. I'm just going to work exactly as much as I'm told to and stop. And so that was the problem. But then you see a society in which, like, a true extreme society of inequality, like, where the truly wealthy and well-off, and the most extreme versions are ones in which you even say rights and values are different for different people. So if you go back to like the Middle Ages, it was literally, if you were a commoner and you committed murder, you were killed. If you were born a noble person and you committed murder, you got like tied up for a few hours and they threw tomatoes at you, but they wouldn't kill you. Like, you could not commit murder. Like, you would not be charged for it. You were allowed to kill whoever you wanted. And so these are the sorts of ways. So these ones, we basically, in our society right now, kind of, at the very least, in terms of written law, and there's still some degree of, and this is what we'll talk about next time, in terms of racism and systematic racism and things like that. But at the very least, we at least think that these are good things. And we like opportunity, but money ties in and causes problems. Do you have a hand? Okay. All right, so let's talk about tech and equality now. So, the basic question for this class is just, has the invention of cyber technology made things more or less equal in terms of opportunity?
More.
That's the big question. Is the invention of cyber technology mean that the world has now more equality of opportunity or less equality of opportunity? And the reason this is such a good question is because there's good arguments on both sides.
I just want to point out that it depends on the situation. Like, say, like, Google already created Google Education, and Google has founded, like, this volunteer thing, like, where they donate Chromebooks to the people who don't have the opportunity to go to schools in Africa. but at the same time, it's a bad thing, cause like, many people like don't have VPNs and all that stuff, so.
Yeah, so here's the main, this is a really good case, is you've got a case in which 100 years ago, if you were born in a small village in, say, Central Africa, where were you going to spend your life, almost certainly?
Literally nothing other than the.
Like that area. Nowadays, who is, like, the farthest away you might go is like a local city. And that might be like a 10-hour boat ride. And you probably would never go very far. And this is how, like, this was the norm for most of human history. If you look at human history, it was very often the case that you would never go more than, say, 20 miles away from the city you were born in your entire life, because we didn't have the transportation. The farthest you'd ever talk to somebody, maybe someone would come through and talk to you, but odds were you're just talking to other people in your town and village and the next one over. Now, though, with cyber technology, that is totally different. Now, if you move halfway around the world, you can stay in touch with the people. You can go back and visit them. You can keep a constant correspondence with people from anywhere in the world at any time. We could have a conference call right now with somebody it's the middle of the night and they're, halfway around the world and it's dark. That is a totally different way. And so in what sense has this created increased opportunities? What is the way in which cyber technology, in this case, because of these connections, has created opportunities that may not have existed before? All right, let's go. What's something that you really, really like to do and you would like it to be a job? Like if in an imaginary world, like just something that you have always wanted to be able to do and like make money off of it.
Iron Man suit? No, I'm joking. I'm like, watch funny videos.
Yeah, so say, like, here's one thing. Watching and critiquing videos. Like, so let's just go with a movie critic. Imagine that you wanted to be a movie critic. And you lived in a relatively small town somewhere in the world with one movie theater that got a new movie once every 2 months. And you would go to that movie theater and you'd see it 3 times. And you loved them. And you made so many, like anyone you ever talked to was like, wow, that was a really good point. You made a really good observation about that movie. But it's like, say 1950 and you live in a small town in the middle of, you pick somewhere that isn't the United States. Could you ever turn that into a career? No, you couldn't do that. Why not? Why couldn't you become a movie critic?
Because that time is not there.
Yeah, so one thing is, like, who would you be talking to? Your friends. If you wanted to actually make money off of it, what would you have to do? You'd have to move somewhere with a big newspaper and prove to them that you could be their movie critic. You know what? Like 50, 100 years ago, moving to a big city from a small village was expensive, and odds were that you couldn't afford to do it, and if you ended up there, odds were you would never get the job, and it wasn't worth it. Nowadays, what do? You want to be a movie critic. What do? You go online, and what do you start?
Review.
Yeah, you just start reviewing things. And you start reaching out to people who write like movie review blogs. You're like, hey, I wrote this up about this movie. Want to take a look at it? And then you can send it to them and they respond. Like if you read up on stories about people who are now like writing movie reviews in the New York Times or writing sports reviews, a lot of these guys who like write for ESPN are guys who literally just had a blog and then sent it to somebody who liked their work and was like, yeah, sure, write some freelance stuff for us. They wrote some freelance stuff. And then they got hired. And the next thing you know, they're a big name at ESPN. And that's not something that you could have done. This is another thing, like the ways that you get a lot of like sports reporters and movie critics now who aren't from the United States, because you can write in and contact people, even if like not just like not originally, but like not living in the United States. Why? Because technology is so global that there's now an audience for things like movie reviews worldwide. So what are some other ways along this sense in which tech has increased equality of opportunity? We've got that there are jobs that you can do. What else?
Oh yeah, that's true.
Like, there are other sorts of jobs and ways you can make money now that you couldn't before.
Mm-hmm.
So like what?
YouTube.
Yeah, you can now make money on YouTube. That is an opportunity. Like, you can get your start and make money as like a comedian in a way you never could before. If you get funny enough or have enough of a voice that people like watching you, you can just sit on your couch and just record funny videos and do something you love doing and make money. Another one, the idea of imagine getting in a time machine and going and talking to your great-grandparents if they're no longer with us, or like your great-great-great-grandparents and going, hey grandparents, let me explain to you what an Instagram influencer is. Like, imagine the look on someone's face in the year 1900 if you explained what an Instagram influencer was. There's literally a job where all you do is try out products in front of a camera and talk about them and have a lot of people listening to you because something about you makes a lot of people want to listen to you. Like, these are opportunities that never existed before. Or imagine that you just like, in the United States, our education system is not perfect by any means, but it is, on the whole, compared to other places in the world, quite good. There are ways in America, and it changes from place to place, but on the whole, if you go to a school, like an elementary school in America, it's going to be better than if you go to an elementary school in like a very poor village somewhere in like the developing world. So, because of this, well, first off, why do we care about education? What's the point of it? If you get educated, why do we care? Why do we send our kids to school? And it's not just so you don't have to take care of them during the day. Yeah, you can get a job. What's the point? Because to learn, you need to have a base of knowledge in order to learn other things. Like, think about how hard it would be to computer code if you had never learned basic math. And so, like, that's the idea behind schooling. And in this case, the people who have better educations are better off. One of the best ways to equal opportunity is make sure that everyone gets access to education. 100 years ago, if you did not live in a country with a good education system and you wanted to learn about something, you were very limited in terms of your options. Now, though, say you want to learn how to, I don't know, fix a toilet. Say you decide you want to be a plumber because in your town there's no plumber and you think this would be a good way to start making money. What would you do?
YouTube.
You go to Google or YouTube. You can get the basics. Or you can teach yourself to something like code. You can become incredibly good if you just are dedicated and you spend a lot of time practicing. These are things that you couldn't have done before. There are now tutorials for just about everything. You no longer need to live in the best school districts to get the best education. You just need an internet connection and knowledge of how to use the internet. And you can get information that you never would have been able to get before. And that is a major leveler in terms of access to certain types of information.
And also life too, like when it comes to like DIYs or do-it-yourselves life hacks, and also like how to pass the road test in one chance, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and here's another thing is, when you look at opportunity, another thing that majorly gets incorporated into equality of opportunity is amount of time you have to do things. So one of the major differences between somebody who has a lot of money and somebody who's working 4 jobs just to pay the bills is the person who's working 4 jobs just to pay the bills doesn't have as much time as somebody who has so much money that they have a house cleaner and a cook and everything else. Therefore, this person with more free time is able to get more done and get equal opportunity. Well, with the internet, that's one way in which certain types of things are made much more equal in terms of time. If you, 50 years ago, if you wanted to learn about something, you'd need to get a book on it. And how well or easily you could get that book was very dependent on where you lived. If you lived in New York City and you worked hard enough, you could probably find a book on just about everything. But if you lived in, say, like rural Kansas and you wanted to learn about something, finding a copy of that book would have been very difficult. You'd probably have to take a bus to the University of Kansas and check it out of the library, and based on the size Kansas is, we're talking, an 8-hour bus ride. So that's another major difference, is time has been shrunk down on certain sorts of things, that even just by having a phone, you now have access to information and can do things quickly. And being less well off or being in a rural area evens the playing field to a big degree. So those are the sorts of ways in which he is going up with tech. Alright, so opportunity thanks to tech going up. What others? Are there any other ways that you can think of opportunity, equality of opportunity increasing, or the world becoming a more fair and equal place?
I think this is a little bit going off a tangent, but reading the book somewhat directs me towards the thought about the obligation to the need, somewhat to this. And in other spheres of ethics, there are generally different scenarios on how to approach this. For example, three possible scenarios are to save everyone, save someone, or save no one. That in regards to the developmental potential. That is, if you waste your resources on someone who doesn't need help, it's just a waste of resources. If you help someone who can survive with help, that will help that kind of individual. If you waste resources on someone who will not survive even with help, that is also a waste.
Yeah. So, and are you seeing that in terms of now with the tech, it's easier to identify and get resources to the ones who might, like that middle class or that middle group that it would help to get the resources to?
It's rather in the sense that there is a social standard of being a good Samaritan. For example, we want to look at ourselves as people who fit the good Samaritan standard.
Mm-hmm.
But in the other regard, we have an obligation somewhat to be a decently good Samaritan, not exactly a super derogatory individual who we strive to be, but who we can't be at all times. That is, in this regard, if you allow me just to, that's a little rant. I'm a political science major, so I will speak on this regard. If you try to save everyone, you can't just save everyone because that is logistically impossible, logistically, monetarily impossible. But if you try to help someone in the long run, not in the short term, you can probably fix their infrastructure, create, let's say, cable networks for this regard, spread out the information, spread to the World Wide Web, and thus increase access to the information. But that will be slow. So that fits the scenario of helping someone, but some others in the long run will not get that same help.
So the idea is that as we see, so it's more of an observation of as we see the infrastructure and things spreading out, that middle group that is able to be helped is being helped, and that group is now brought up into the equal playing field in a way that, okay.
It will slowly increase.
Yeah, so here's another, that's a really great point. Working with this, you can think in terms of like, another thing that cyber tech is doing is just as the infrastructure increases and everybody is getting more and more access to these things, what we're seeing is it's not just like thinking about it individually. It's now thinking about it entire groups of people in a society that couldn't have a say or couldn't connect or couldn't get access to information now have access to it. And so another way in which we're seeing equal opportunity is minority groups who used to not have a voice are now able to be brought up and have a say in a society in ways that it never was before. So for instance, like, think about any sort of like social movement which was able to get off the ground and respond because of this new infrastructure which is put into the society. So things like political protests that were able to get off the ground, or things like the Arab Spring, where there was actual like political changes because people were able to connect with the internet. So it's not just that, or something else. Look at the presidential campaigns. Even 25 years ago, somebody like Bernie Sanders could not have run the campaign he is running. What is the fundamental difference between, like, why is Bernie Sanders able to run a competent and quite successful campaign today, even though he couldn't have, say, 40 years ago? What's the major difference?
Yeah.
Yeah, so who pays for Bernie Sanders? Who pays for his campaign? Is it that he has Wall Street banks giving him tons of money? No, because what's one of Bernie's things? He wants to shut down the Wall Street banks' power over America. That's one of his things. He's saying, like, we need to regulate the banks more. So they're not going to give him money because they don't want to be regulated. Who gives Bernie Sanders money?
Political election committees?
Yeah, collect. And who do they mostly get their money from? Yeah, internet donations of like anywhere between $5 and $20. It used to be the case that for it to be worth the time and effort to get money from a campaign, like from somebody supporting your campaign, it had to be like, we're talking like tens of thousands of dollars before it was worth it for them to reach out to you, because you'd have to write a check to them, and they weren't gonna come to you and be like, hey, would you give us a $20 bill? Like, nobody was going around doing that in this way. Now, if you send, it's so easy to send Bernie Sanders $5 that college students can now participate in this sort of thing in ways they couldn't before. So, college students are now able, Bernie's able to get money from people like college students who can't afford to give more than, say, $5. But here's the thing, you get 100,000 college students give you $5, that's the same as one big bank. And that's a totally new way in which, like, now, because of the internet, you as a political actor, it's more than just your vote. You can actually have a say that ends up meaning something in terms of who gets money. And also, the other big difference is you can now reach out and make people know what your concerns are and what your worries are in a way that it never was before. So that's the sort of ways in which it's increasing. Now though, on the other side, it's not just honey and roses and happiness. What ways has inequality majorly increased or been affected by cyber tech?
We were talking about it earlier, like the idea about communism, like what this does to the playing field once you make it so broad, you know? Like once you expand the playing field to this level, like yeah, the opportunity is increased, but now the value of the opportunity has diminished. Like people don't value the opportunity that they have anymore. That's not necessarily true, because there's some people that they still do take things that they found on the internet to be valuable, but like for example, like we're talking about the plumber, like if you could just find out how to become a plumber on the internet and Google, like you're not gonna take the time to go to plumbing school or get a plumbing degree or you know be certified plumber.
So here's one major thing that's changing, is the ways in which you can make money and the nature of like a steady income has fundamentally changed thanks to the internet. So, what do I mean by gig economy? Have people heard this term before? I think that's the expression for it. The basic idea is you don't have a steady income. Instead, you just have a whole bunch of side hustles, each one of which makes you enough money to pay some of your bills, but there's no stability or guarantee. So back in 1950, if you were working for a company, it was not unheard of for you to, your first job, to join the, like say you're born in Detroit, Michigan. Your odds are, when you hit 18, if you didn't go to college, you were probably working where?
Military.
Pardon?
Military.
So that's one option, but so let's say there's not a war on. 1950 in Detroit, anyone know what was being built there or produced there in huge numbers? There we go. Automobiles. Cars in 1950, Detroit was one of the automotive capitals of the world. General Motors, Ford, they were being built in Detroit, which meant odds were if you turned 18, there was going to be a job for you at Ford or GM. And you could work there your entire life. And if something happened to you, odds were that the company would pay for medical treatment during that time because you were a member of a union who worked in that factory. And you could be pretty safe that they weren't going to fire you because there was pretty constant, like you'd have to mess up pretty badly. And if your kids wanted jobs in the factory, odds were pretty high that they could get jobs. And so you had this sense of like, your job might not be the most interesting thing in the world to you. It might be the same thing over and over, but you were pretty guaranteed you did not have to worry about paying the bills because you knew every month Bill was coming through, this was the time, this was the place. Nowadays, it's totally different. If you make money, say you knit scarves and sell them on Etsy, you drive an Uber, and you work part-time at a Panera Bread. All three of these are perfectly like common jobs that somebody might use to make money. But there's no sense of like guarantee that you are going to have a steady income. Because what could happen?
You go lose your job.
Yeah, so Uber might go on, might deal with a major restructuring. Also, I don't know, have any of you driven Uber before? Like been like the driver? I never have, but I've heard like talking to the drivers, like it's pretty, like you are treated pretty terribly. Yeah, Uber drivers are treated like shit. And as time has gone on, like the quality for Uber drivers has gotten worse and worse. And like you're not paid based on anything, like the same things that change your price